Well, welcome to the Table Talks podcast. This is week 1 of At the Movies here at Echo.Church, and we're so thrilled to be doing this series. Each week, we're unpacking one of our favorite films and their stories and how it intersects with God's story. And we're kicking out the series for the very first time today on Father's Day, which is super exciting, with a really powerful story through a movie called The Forge. And so I'm joined by Pastor Jason, who taught that message for us this week. And so we're going to unpack this thing together.
All right, let's
Yeah.
do it.
His first time on the podcast, so give him a little grace today.
Yes, please.
So this is a movie that I think most people probably haven't seen. So maybe give us like a little bit of a summary of like what's that story about?
Yeah, great movie. In fact, it came on my radar about maybe a year ago, or when it came out last year, 2024, and I thought, man, what a great movie it would be for my men's group. And so I lead Echo Men's Gathering here at the North San Jose campus, and we get a pretty large group of guys every Monday night, and so we decided to have a movie night, and we watched it. And I can tell you that every guy in the room cried the whole time watching this movie, so, including myself, and I was like, "Man, that would be great for at the movies." Kinda sparked in my mind back then, and then actually God made it happen, so,
Yeah.
but yeah, the movie's it's a, redemption story or coming to faith story of a wayward teen, 19 years old who, um, comes through a lot of pain and a lot of brokenness in his life due to his dad leaving. It's something that we can all relate to, especially as men. But I think every human being can relate to it. The fact that um, we have we don't have perfect parents. And now you and I we're parents, right? So like we're especially sensitive to that when we let our kids down or, we just see them going through hard things. It is, it's something that we're really, we should be focused on, right? As parents. But a lot of young people come up, they don't have that influence in their lives. And so, we see that in this story of Isaiah where he comes, raised by a single mom who does the very best that she can, but he has a lot of missing pieces in his life that a dad should be bringing into that equation. So, it's a great story of him, meeting up with someone who ends up becoming a spiritual mentor to him and filling in those gaps in his life of actually showing, like, that he matters, that he's seen, that somebody cares about him.
Yeah.
Initially, like, instead of, like, brushing him off, I love that one of their initial interactions was for Joshua to take him to lunch. It's like, "Hey, let's just go eat and sit down and talk. Um, I wanna get to know a little bit about your story," right? It just goes from there
Yeah.
to you see the full arc of Isaiah's transformation, as he comes to faith in Jesus. It's, beautiful story, one that, yeah, all of us, I hope everyone who saw, the movie or saw the teaching, could really relate to.
Yeah. So what was the process for you in writing the message or preparing for the message? Like walk me through your thought process and how you're trying to connect this story with God's story. And also, like, I know it was also significant for you personally as well.
Yeah, I couldn't help like, to go back on my story as I watched it, and that's why one of the reasons I was crying so much, like, watching it the first
Yeah.
time. I was thinking about my own story, but I was also thinking about my son, Jack, who's 14 now, and, um, praying, like, "God, I hope I'm not doing to him things that were done to Isaiah," even inadvertently of being there, physically, but not being present emotionally, and that's why I end up, telling my story in the teaching, um, because I did have, a similar, situation in my life where I was a little bit older than in the movie. Isaiah was very young when his dad left. I was a little bit older, but I was still, not ready for it. I don't think we're ever ready for that for your dad to leave. I was 21, And at college, when I got the phone call, from my mom, and I had been through a lot of turmoil in the family, with just different factions of our family wanting to always seem to be arguing and fighting with one another. Like, there would be long periods in my childhood where we weren't talking to these people, or these people were off limits to us, and there were, um, we weren't spending holidays with these guys, or sometimes it was us, we were on the outs, and, like, no one wanted to come visit us, and I didn't understand why as a little kid, you know? There was just always this weird kinda infighting in the family, but I always held tight to my parents and my brother, like the 4 of us were the core unit, of our family. That was my existence, right? And I was like, even when I went off to college, I said, "Well, I still have this great core group of people that love me unconditionally, would never leave me, would never hurt me, would never suddenly disappear like I had seen other people do in my life." And then, to get the phone call from my mom when I was 21 that like, "Oh, your dad is, having an affair and we're gonna split up." And it was like just being punched in the, like in the face or something. It was like really
Yeah.
jarring,
Yeah.
something you're not, ever ready for. So, that set me down a road that I wasn't ever expecting, but like behaviorally, emotionally, cutting myself off from people emotionally. A lot of the things that we see in Isaiah with his attitude and, his sort of disrespectful demeanor, and the way he treats his mom, the way he treats just anyone he encounters. Like there's a scene in the movie that, he goes into a coffee shop and he's wants to hit on this young girl who's working at the counter. And I thought, man, I used to do stuff like that. Like I was a really bad with, like, the way I would talk to women, the way I treated women, like, it really manifested in a lot of relationships, and even not even getting to a relationship, but getting, like, just, like, dating or just
Yeah.
marrying women, like, treating them with no respect, with no value. I'm very open about that now. I feel like that's very important.
That's an interesting thing that you bring up because you would have thought the opposite would be true, seeing that you had a father who, like, witnessing your father leaving, cheating, doing these things, that you would say to yourself, "Well, I'm gonna not treat women that way."
Yeah.
But you're saying it's actually the opposite?
It is, and you're right, and now when I look back on it, I see and I talk about that in the teaching that, I realized at one point I was acting just like my father,
Huh.
right? But in the moment, I think we put up these walls, to keep people from hurting us,
Yeah.
and so for me, not wanting to be hurt in a relationship setting, I would just be more aggressive in pursuing, a woman physically, or maybe with this bravado that maybe wouldn't result in anything, and that
Yeah.
way you couldn't be hurt by it because you made sure that it didn't manifest into anything real.
Yeah.
But that was kinda I left a long trail of, you know, wreckage in my relationships with women, and I saw it was just a little.
And this was before Jesus.
This was way before Jesus, yeah,
Clarified, before he was a pastor, and I
yes, and way before that too. Yeah, I was in my 20s and,
yeah, yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing, but, like, when I saw that scene with Isaiah and he goes and he's,
Yeah.
being very kinda inappropriate with the girl who's just trying to work at the counter at the coffee shop, and then the dad comes out and approaches him, and even then, he's totally disrespectful
Yeah.
to the dad and kinda brushes him off like, "Hey, I'm doing my thing here. Who are you to talk to me like that?" But that was very much how a young, like, 20s, mid-20s version of me was.
Wow, it's like, you must have been, like, cringing in your seat, like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah, because when you see somebody else doing it,
Yeah.
and believe me, I've come to
Yeah.
terms with all of this for many years now, but when I saw the movie, I was like, "Man, I can
Yeah.
relate to this so much."
I've been noticing it feels like there's, um, like, a cultural moment happening where And I'm sure this happens every cycle or generation where it feels like there's kind of a redefining that is happening around manhood culturally, at least from what I see online. And even there's a shift, and that there's data around where especially men in the United States are shifting back towards more traditional values. Young men are going to church more regularly than they used to now, especially Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And so, like, reflecting on that, and also now on like the story of Isaiah, and then in your story and what you've learned from it, what do you think that's what's the invitation from a story like this, or the things to glean and learn for, I guess, for fathers, but also for men generally? And it's Father's Day, right? We're celebrating this week. Um, what do you glean from that?
Mhm. You know, I think the film speaks to a major issue that we've seen for not just the current young generation, but for several generations, even, going back to mine, and I'm pretty old. But like an identity crisis within men that has come from absent father figures in their home.
Yeah,
And we see it a lot now. What some people may not know is that before I came into ministry, I worked in law enforcement for 25 years, and I worked thousands of cases where, involving young men who were, um, committing crimes and things like that. And we were chasing them to, bring them in to justice and all that stuff. But not looking at it really through that lens that there's a causation to all of this that is not going to be addressed by us doing what we're doing. There's a hole within their hearts that from a father that wasn't there, right? And so that's another part of this that the movie really resonated with me about is that I look back on that aspect of my career and see, wow, that like the power of the loss of a father in a child's life, and I'm not just talking about young men, young women too, we see it a lot,
yeah,
in the church too, but that is a huge factor in, I think, now, like, driving men to faith, like I said, I've led men's gathering here for 5 years. We've seen, hundreds of men, nearly 1,000 men come through the group in our events and our men's retreats and things like that. I've got to counsel and talk with tons and tons of guys, and a lot of their motivation is related to fatherhood. Maybe the missing pieces from their childhood,
mm,
where they're realizing the fallout from that it's led them into a lot of behaviors that they're now trying to overcome, or they're trying to, repent of, or find forgiveness from. But also a lot of them are now fathers themselves, or becoming fathers themselves, and seeing, you know, wow, the value of, like, me being a strong and reliable father who's gonna always be there for my kids, and how can I best do that? Well, it's with Jesus at my side, right? It's like
right.
it's through faith, right? That's gives me the strength, it gives me the tools, it gives me the heart to be able to be the best dad that I can be. So, yeah, I see from my perspective, that's what I see is a lot of men coming to the church, looking for help in that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. In the movie, there's that moment where Joshua brings Isaiah to lunch, and they have this conversation. I think that was the one at lunch where he says, "Be a fountain, not a drain." Is that around their
Yeah.
lunch, or was it in the office? Yeah. Anyways, that was the big statement, right? Be a fountain, not a drain. And you kind of use that. You talked about your different keys towards transformation, and I thought that was interesting, an interesting observation, at least through that statement, because you also talk about like intentionally cultivating discipleship in others, committing to a life of service. Those are all things that are pouring yourself out, right? And doing things for others. And when I think about transformation, typically I think I receive transformation. But here the statement, right? Be a fountain, not a drain. This is Joshua, the mentor, saying this to Isaiah. Like, in order for him to change his life around, he needs to pour himself out. Um, and it felt counterintuitive, like, to think about it that way. Right? When I think about transformation, I think I'm receiving transformation, but actually, it's me pouring out that transforms me. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it takes us pouring out for us to experience an inward transformation? And
Yeah. Actually, the scene in the restaurant is where he says, "What kind of man do you wanna be?"
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I love that because he's leading him gently,
yeah,
right? Like, we should ask questions like that when we're mentoring, or when we're teaching, when we're and ever interacting with people in ministry, is to ask questions to get people thinking. So I love that he initially starts their first conversation, "What kind of man do you wanna be?" And I love, he follows up, he says, "What do you want people to think when they see you coming?"
mm,
That one really hit me. I
yeah,
love that, 'cause, yeah, we should be thinking of those things. But then they get further down the road in the discipleship conversation, and he tells him, "You need to be more of a fountain than a drain." And I love that that does lead into a segment about service, and they even go and they serve at a food bank, and that's where he actually is led into a next step, of picking up the pamphlet with the Romans road and going and giving his life to Jesus. But one thing that comes to mind is, uh, that we need to come to the end of ourselves bef before we can really truly receive inner transformation, right? So as long as we're still working under our own strength and our own pride, our own ego, our own beliefs that we can do these things, that we are capable of doing whatever we need to do, strong, self-made man, all that stuff. When we're still working under those false assumptions, we are not going to be someone who's service minded, right? It's because I'm enough. I don't need Jesus. I don't need him telling me what I should be doing, that I should be going out and serving these people. But I really believe it's when we finally surrender all parts of ourselves, where we can stop being that drain that's pulling energy from people, that's uh, it's kind of sucking the life out of situations because we're just all about us, right? I
yeah,
want you to pour into me instead of me pouring into you. We get past that part of our lives, and we lay that down through surrender to Jesus, is when we get to the end of ourselves, and that's when, um, we're able to pour into others because we're using the power, and the grace of God, right? Like, so it's a mindset shift where you need to be able to see how much you've received in terms of grace and forgiveness from God, and then you will be able to pour that into others,
yeah,
right? Jesus said, in Matthew 5:3, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," right? And he's talking about those people who are at the end of themselves spiritually, like, "I don't know where else to turn. I am, spiritually bankrupt," is a phrase that I read. It's like, you are at a point where you don't have anywhere else to go. And so you can only go to him,
yeah,
and then he starts to fill you up, um, with faith and with grace, and it overflows out of you and into others. And so
yeah,
service is a natural, um, sort of end product or byproduct, or it's like it's what happens when we're filled with the grace of God within our hearts.
yeah,
So yeah, when we're followers of Jesus, service should come naturally to us.
yeah, yeah. I was thinking as as you were speaking to, I've been reminded lately more and more of how disproportionately uh, God values humility. I mean, he honors the humble and he humbles the proud, right? But we see it all over Scripture, like stories over and over again, where God uses the unlikely, the unassuming, the runt of the litter, even, right? Like King David, right? story of David and Goliath, using the little child to accomplish the miraculous uh, conquering of their battle that they were in. And we see it all over Scripture. There are example after example after example, Jesus being one of those himself. And I think putting yourself in a posture of service is also a posture of humility. Um, and I think that's a part of it, right? You don't get to experience and getting to the end of yourself is one of those things as well. It is humbling. It puts you in a place where God and yourself are in their rightful place.
Yeah.
You're not putting yourself
Good.
above him anymore. He's in this rightful place in front of you.
That is good. Yeah, I mean, and he can take, even, when we look at David and Goliath, we look at size differences, but I
Yeah.
think we can talk about size differences within our hearts or our faith, that he can take somebody like I always come back to my own story, like he can take somebody like me who was so extremely broken, who I lived for just personal pursuits. I wanted to be, the most successful in my career. I wanted to be the most, um, when I was a cop, I wanted to be known as that guy who would just go out there and get it done and go after the bad guys and fear no one, and no one's gonna say that to me. You're not gonna
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
treat me like that. Like this super pride issue. There was no humility in there at all. And again, I didn't have Jesus in my life. But he can take somebody like that, and trust me, I wonder and I pray every day, now that I'm a pastor, I say, like, "God, why? Why? Like, why did you pick me?"
Mm,
Um, and I don't know, other than he loves to use people who are the least likely, or the last one you would assume
yeah.
would be the one. And I do hear that from people, that when they find out now, maybe they have been away from Echo for a while, a few years or something.
Like, really, you?
Yeah, and they'll know that, like, I was the guy who was the security guy for
Yeah.
Echo for 10 years,
Yeah.
and they go, "What, you're a pastor now?" Like,
Yeah. Interesting choice.
how
Yeah.
how can that, like, well, yeah, they go, "Why did you pick that?" I'm like, I didn't pick that. I didn't pick that.
Yeah.
God came and he said, "This is what, I'm gonna have you do next."
Yeah.
But yeah, through humbling my heart, though, I wouldn't be able to have heard the calling,
Yeah.
that he had for me if I hadn't.
Yeah. In a few weeks, we're through Pastor Stephen's message, we're gonna unpack the story of Gideon, who's also one of those characters that I mean, talk about somebody even a very little faith who didn't really believe God could, and especially not through himself, and then was used to do something that was, I mean, beyond incredible. Um, and again, yeah, another example of God using the humble and those that are at the end of themselves, and then flipping the script on it. Yeah, it's powerful. Um, Further in the story, I mean, near the end of the story in the movie, right? Isaiah gives his life to Jesus. And then pretty shortly after, he's actually confronted with his dad, which is like a big moment, right? It breaks him essentially. He goes crazy. Um, and that's when he's called to forgive. And so that's the next step in the journey. And first of all, I love the sequence of that in the story, because I think you alluded to that too in the message. You said um, you don't forgive people first to then earn God's forgiveness. I think that was one of your statements in your message, which I think is really significant, right? He came to God and he allowed God to change him first. He didn't have to like clean all of his mess in his heart and everything before he came to God. He was able to come to God just as he was. And I think that's significant. Um, but then he's confronted with this moment where he faces his dad and he just can't bear the thought of forgiving him. So we know like how the story ends, and he pleads with God and he does. But I'm curious, we like to play the other side of the story, not the other side of the story, but uh, alternate universe. What if he hadn't, right? Uh, like we all know we have people we should forgive in our lives, or in the past maybe we have needed to forgive, and we know that forgiveness is a good thing. What's the consequence of not forgiving?
Mhm. Yeah, I love what you said first about, um, when we come to faith, we're still carrying all of our pain, all of the weights that we put on. I always imagine like a backpack that we fill with
Yeah.
weights, and it's got like all the things from our past, and we still lug that around with us. Um, some people will come to me now that I'm a pastor, and they say, "Well, I don't think I'm really ready for faith, or I'm ready to take a next step because I still am like I still am broken. I still hold on to all these things. I still do these things. I still think these things. Like they have to be perfect before they can come to Jesus." And like that is oppositeville. That's not the way it is. Like come to him right now, the way you are. And I love that the movie shows that
Yeah.
he did not address his father issue or a multitude of other issues
Yeah.
when he came to Jesus. He just came as he is because that's our starting point, right? But forgiveness, now for me, I was a follower of Jesus for probably, I don't know, over 10 years before I forgave my dad. And there is a there is a process that happens within us. We don't have like microwave sanctification. We go from 0 to fixed in 30 seconds. That's not how it works. And so,
Yeah.
um,
How it works in movies, right? Which happens pretty quickly in this one, but you're right. Like in real life, it is much more of a process.
you're right. Like in the movie, they do condense that into like this one powerful scene where he's like, "Okay, all right, Jesus, all right," like almost like egging him on,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of weird, but you get the point.
Right.
Where they are condensing probably years of spiritual wrestling into that one scene.
Yeah.
It makes it really powerful. Um, but I think that forgiveness for us is a status check of our heart, of where we are in our journey. Um, and Jesus when Jesus says, and I touched on this in the message about like if you don't forgive, your father won't forgive. And that can be really scary. And I hope I addressed it enough in the message. Like that's not what he's saying. It's not. This isn't like an ultimatum. Like, hey, you better do this or you're out. He's talking about like it's a check of the state of your heart.
Yeah.
Like, where are you in your faith? Where are you in your trust of God? Um, you know, is what Jesus did on the cross enough for you?
Mm.
Right? Like we need to ask those questions of ourselves. Anytime that we believe that we can't get over an issue, whatever it is with you, I counsel a lot of men on like lust and pornography issues, really hard stuff, right? Um, and every man should talk to somebody about that, right? But if you believe that you are just stuck and you can't get past it, and there's no way that God can heal you of that, I know this is a little off topic, but it's a similar concept. That when you look at Jesus on the cross and what he did for you, ask yourself, is that enough?
Mm.
Is his grace that I'm receiving, the forgiveness I'm receiving because of what Jesus did for me, is that enough? Of course, the answer is yes. It is enough, right?
Yeah. But do you believe it is
But do you
the
believe it?
question. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, how do you feel about that? Um, and why is it that you're not giving it enough weight in your mind to understand that that is enough for you? And so, when we look at forgiveness, it's the same type of a concept that you've been forgiven of so much. I've been forgiven of so much crap. I have one of my favorite T-shirts that just says the word "forgiven"
Yeah.
on the chest, and I wanna just shout that to the world. Like, if you knew me,
Yeah.
if you knew what I've done, and God forgives me, right? How could I not forgive somebody else? And it actually was to plug a book. You probably all have heard of it. It's Wild at Heart by John Eldredge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very famous book in Christian circles, but I had never read it until, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, and that was when I read that book, and it's a little corny in certain parts,
Yeah.
but there's some real good nuggets in
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
about men, the stories of other men that you can really relate to, and what they went through and things that happened in their childhoods or even in adulthood, words that were spoken to them, spoken over them, about them, things that were done to them that they carried and they didn't really ever address or even know how to address. And I read that book, man, and it was like the lights turned on in my mind. I was like, I'm this makes sense to me now. Like looking back on everything that happened to me, um, like 11 years old, I was exposed to pornography. My father brought home this gigantic box of it
Oh gosh.
from his brother who got in trouble with his wife for having it in his house. I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of these like old school magazines. And my dad, I mean, the same dad we're talking about, he brings this stuff home and leaves it in the house with an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old boy. And without a thought in his head, like maybe I shouldn't do that. And so we were exposed to that at a young age. And then there was so many other things about words that were spoken over me and things, and then all leading up to in a 10-year span from finding that box to my dad walking out, like a lot happened
Yeah.
in my life. And that it was because of that book really opened my eyes to start analyzing it. So
Yeah.
so, anyone, man, woman, whoever you are, analyze your life and start to trace things backwards. It's gonna help you a lot. Um, but, reading that book also brought me to a point where I could understand myself better,
Mm.
and I could understand God better. I could understand the grace that I've received and that I needed to forgive. It almost became like a burning desire I had to forgive my father. Um,
Mm.
and it was more just like I think just seeing how this all happened and understanding that like he's just as messed up as me as anybody else. That I'm sure he inherited a lot of stuff from his past, just like I inherited stuff
Yeah.
from him into my life. And so we all tend to do that to one another going forward. And so I was like, I need to call him and I need to forgive him. Uh, I don't want to carry any of this anymore. It's not worth it. I just felt like everything made more sense to me.
Yeah. How did that go? That conversation with
It was great. I was still working. I was working in San Francisco, and I had these long car rides
yeah.
home every day. So I was driving down 280, and I just I didn't even know how to reach him, to be honest. Like I initially had to reach out to um, his new wife, I think on Facebook and try to get a phone number. And then I got like, they gave me a house number, like a landline number. I was like,
Yeah.
does this thing's even work? Called that. I couldn't get through to anybody. Um, Finally, then she answered it and she said, oh, here's his cell phone. And then I called him and I got a hold of him. And, and it was literally the first time we'd spoken in a long, like many, many years. I have 2 kids and it was like,
He's never met
he's
them.
never come out. He met my daughter um, when she was a baby because we traveled back, to Maine where he lives with a newborn so that he could meet her, but never has come out to visit or anything like that. Had never at this point had never met my son, um, Jack or anything like that. So there's like this huge gap, like
Yeah.
in his life, in my life, and I was like, "Don't you want to know these people?" Um, but we had a great conversation where I just talked about my faith. Um, he was really pleased with that, and we talked about the things that happened, with him leaving us and all that, and he's in that situation. He's living with that same woman and her kids. They're older now, but like that became his life permanently. The woman that he left my mom for, he's with her, married. So there's no getting out of it really for him, and he's
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
He's happy, and I told him I'm happy for him, but I did forgive him. Um, we cried. He received it, emotionally, but it wasn't like a guilt thing, like you should feel bad about this or anything.
Yeah.
It was,
I would hope forgiveness,
yeah.
not a guilt trip.
But sometimes people can turn into that, like, well, you
Yeah.
should feel, and
Yeah.
I offered none of that. I was just like, look, Dad, I'm well along in my own journey now. I've come to some realizations that I've been carrying all this stuff, and it affected me in a lot of ways. I just want to let you know I forgive you. That doesn't. I'm not carrying that anymore. I love you, and I think that we should get together and see each other, and we did. Well, not under the best circumstances, but um, my mom ended up passing away. Um, And I went back to Maine for the funeral, and I brought the whole family, and we ended up, hanging out with my dad and his family, and everybody together. It was really great. Um, Ended up doing a lot of things, having fun, and, it's Maine, so you do a lot of outdoorsy stuff, and in fact, he just reached out to me, 2 days ago and was like, "Are you coming this summer? Because we wanna go boating, and we wanna go, do all this cool stuff." So trying to figure out how we can do
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad that he's back in my life, even though now he's in his 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing your story with us. Thanks for being really transparent, open about your struggles, your learnings, for working hard on this message to bring it to our church. I hope it was of encouragement to everybody that's watching. And hopefully you were able to catch the message as well on Sundays, because during At the Movies, really we only watch our services live. So you can catch him either at one of our local campuses in Fremont, where Pastor Jason's at, or North San Jose and Sunnyvale. And online, we're no longer on our YouTube channel doing this series. We'll be at our church online platform, which is at Echo.Online.Church. And you can catch them live. We have a bunch of different service times you can check out right there on that link. So make sure you check those out so you can catch those live as they're happening. That wraps up our time together. Thank you so much for joining us. You can always subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next one that's coming out next week, as we're going to be tackling week 2 of our series. We're going to be unpacking the movie Inside Out 2. We got a great message from Pastor Sarah. You're not going to want to miss it. That's it. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.